Okay, let's make a start. Good morning to all of you. And for me, it's evening here in Sydney, Australia. If you haven't guessed that from my accent already, my name is Greg Einfeld, and I am the founder and the CEO of Price Wizard, and I'm also an AI enthusiast. I use AI for everything that I can, both in personal and in business life. And what I'd like to do today is to share with you some of the tools and some of the approaches that I use. In my observation, many participants and employees in the BTR industry use AI, especially for writing, and I think there's a whole range of broader applications for which we could be using AI, and I'm going to share some of those with you in this webinar. Today, I'll be running live AI queries, and that means I don't always know exactly what the answers are going to be. There's an old saying that you should never ask a question in a public forum if you don't know what the answer is. So please wish me luck. I'd like to make this session interactive, so please feel free to make comments and ask questions. I have more than enough prompts to take us through the 75 minutes. However, if you've got any particular challenges and you'd like some help with AI in solving that, then just pop them into the chat and I'm happy to address those and help you work through those. Just keep in mind, if you put your name in there, then everybody will see that your business has that challenge, so you can post anonymously in that respect. Let's get going, and as I said, feel free to ask any questions as we go through, and I'll stop from time to time to address those questions. We're going to start with a poll. So allow me to bring up our first and only poll. There's two questions in this poll, and the two questions are very similar. First one is about your AI usage for personal use, and the second one is for business use. So I'll give you about 10 more seconds to answer that. I did notice we ran a similar webinar earlier today for an Australian audience, and I'm going to try and move a little bit faster this time than I did there so we can get through some more content. Okay, I'm going to end this poll now and share the results. So what we see is personal use. If we add up the first two categories, we're at about 72%, and business use, if we add up the first two categories, we're at 58%. So you don't use AI quite as much as the Australian audience that we saw earlier. And I can also see that you're using AI more for personal than for business, which doesn't really surprise me. And that's the purpose of this webinar, is to try and help you bridge that gap. So I'll stop sharing that, and that's helpful for me just to know where we're at and how frequently you're using these tools. So, the question about the future of work: will AI replace BTR operations managers? And you can take that word or that term, BTR operations managers, and put your own job title in there instead. So, in other words, are you still going to have a job in a few years' time? In my opinion, yes. All of you will still have jobs with one proviso, and that is that it won't be AI that replaces BTR operations managers. It will be BTR operations managers that use AI will replace those that don't. And so it's really important for all of us and for our careers that we start using these tools and getting the most out of them. And we can see that with any other technology that's been introduced. Consider, for example, calculators, spreadsheets, Microsoft Word and word processors, and computers. So anybody that doesn't use any of those tools today has been replaced by somebody that does. And that will be exactly the same with AI and generative AI. Uh, it's quite amazing to see how quickly ChatGPT reached 1 million users when it was launched 2.5 years ago, compared to other previous technologies. It really blew everything else out of the water, and the adoption has continued to increase since then. And the rate at which ChatGPT and other AI tools are improving is also growing at an exponential rate. Now, I want to share with you two challenges to be aware of with any of these generative AI tools, such as ChatGPT. The first one is called hallucination, and this is where the tool gets it wrong. I want to tell you about this gentleman on the screen. His name's Stephen Schwartz. He's an American lawyer. His client was a passenger on an aeroplane, and the air hostesses hadn't applied the brakes on the drinks cart. And so the drinks cart started rolling down the aisle and hit him on the leg and injured his leg. He sued the airline, and he used this lawyer, Stephen Schwartz, who you can see in front of you. And the lawyer, in preparing the case, uh, conducted some research using ChatGPT, and the AI tool, ChatGPT, came up with some cases that didn't actually exist. And Stephen Schwartz presented these cases in court. The judge had a problem because the judge couldn't find these cases, and it turns out they didn't actually exist, and he got in a lot of trouble. It wasn't great for his reputation and his career. So you should always fact check information that you're getting from AI tools, because it does hallucinate. In other words, it can make mistakes from time to time. The other challenge to be aware of is data privacy. So the way I overcome this is in two steps. The first one is I use a tool that does not take my data that I put in and use it to train its own models. So I don't use ChatGPT. I use Claude, which is an alternative to ChatGPT, because in my opinion, it's going to provide you with better, and me, it's going to provide better protection against model training with my data. And secondly, I anonymize all data before I put it into the AI tools as well, just to provide an additional layer of comfort. So there's a couple of tips for you as far as data privacy is concerned. We're going to be working with two different tools today. One is called Poe.com and the other one is Claude.ai. I'm not actually going to use the ChatGPT interface. However, Poe is a marketplace where you can access dozens of different AI models, including the ChatGPT models, and therefore we'll use ChatGPT, but through the Poe.com interface. I subscribe to both of these and I get a lot of value out of both of them. I just quickly want to share this slide with you. This is a study by OpenAI, which is the company behind ChatGPT, and they've identified 6 common AI use cases from their own research based on millions and millions of queries. Starting in the top and moving around to the right, they are content creation or writing. There's research, coding. We won't be looking at coding today, but it is something that we are using AI for in our business, and it's the most common commercial use of AI. Then we have data analysis, ideation and strategy, and finally automation. So I will be running queries on 4 out of these 6 today, with the exception of coding, and I'll be talking about automation at the end. I actually think it's the most interesting part of the entire presentation, and it will be at the end. We won't be running queries on automation, but I will be showing you how you could use automation to completely streamline some of your processes. What's really important with AI queries is a good prompt. The more informative your prompt, the better the output you're going to get. And that's no different from having an employee where you give them some instructions. The clearer your instructions and the more information you provide, the better the outcome is going to be. So always consider it in that respect. If you were briefing an employee on a particular task, you give them as much information as possible. And these are 5 different categories that you might want to cover off. We've got context, role, task, constraints, and then goals. So we'll look at those in some of our examples. So with that background, we're now going to move into the demonstration. I'll just do a quick check to see if we have any questions. Not at this point, so feel free to ask any questions as we go along. And hopefully you can all see a Microsoft Word document now. So the first prompt we're going to provide is around ideation, and you'll remember that was one of the 6 different use cases that was identified. And we are going to use a tool called Poe. So let me bring up Poe. Here's Poe. Now with Poe, if I click here on Explore, you can see there are dozens of different AI models that we can choose from. And even from the ChatGPT stable, we have here GPT 4.1, GPT 4.0, and O3 Pro, O4 Mini, O3. These O3 and O4 models, for example, are used for reasoning. So different models are used for different purposes. So let's start with GPT 4.1, which is the standard current model that you might use in ChatGPT. And here's my prompt. So we're going to do some ideation, and we're going to ask GPT to tell us how can we use ChatGPT or Claude. And we're giving some background that I use this for personal use. I don't use it much for work. And I'm the manager of a BTR operations team. Please list 10 possible use cases. I'm aiming to learn something and to practice and create some efficiency at work, and I don't want to spend any additional money. So let's see what it comes up with. And very quickly, we now have 10 different use cases. So if you're wondering how to use this, here's some great ideas for you to experiment with. So drafting and polishing tenant communications. I would imagine many of you are using these AI tools for writing already. Summarizing meeting notes. So you could write your own notes and then get the tool to summarize it. You could also get a transcription tool to listen to your meeting and take a transcript and then summarize the transcript, for example. Explaining lease agreements, creating FAQs. So you can see the list here, and there's a strong correlation between many items on this list and what we're going to do today. So I won't go through them all one by one. What I could do, if some of these sound particularly interesting for me, I could ask for more information and dig deeper on some of these. I'm not going to do that right now, but that's really important, is that when the AI tool gives you an idea, that you dig deeper and keep asking more and more questions. Tell me more about that. How do I do that? What steps would I run through? And so on, and get down into the nitty gritty, just like you would with an employee who starts off giving you an overview, and then you might drill into a particular area. So that's our first use case. Now I want to move into a tenant application process. So we're going to do this in Claude. We'll start a new chat. So this is Claude. Claude is a competitor of ChatGPT and a different interface. So I'm a BTR operations manager. I'm designing a residential lease application form. What information should I be asking for? I could give more context and background and so on here. So it comes up with a list of all the information that we might put into our application form. So that's much faster than going out there and reviewing perhaps other application forms from other companies and maybe doing some mystery shopping in order to get a hold of them. Here we are, we've just come up with the answer. Now, what we're going to do next is we're going to say, please design the form, but it's asking for, oh, gone to the wrong page, it's asking for this section called required disclosures and consent. So we might just leave that out. Please design a form including all the above apart from required disclosures and consents. So now the AI tool is going to go away and actually design what this form looks like for us. So it's creating what they call an artifact. And what you can see here is the computer code that is being generated, the HTML code that is going to prepare this form for us. So I'm going to wait a minute while that happens, and while it does, we'll have a look at the next prompt so that I'm ready to go with the next prompt once this form is ready. It takes a little bit of time, but it's much quicker than having to do it yourself. So hopefully it won't take too much longer, but what we're going to come up with here, once this is finished, is a pretty attractive looking form that I would say is good enough that you could use it in your business. You'll only believe me when you see it, of course. Now, while that's going, I might, oh, here we go. Here's our form. Okay. So you can see that this is something that you could put onto your website. You could publish it on your website. Now, when I did this earlier today, it came up with a slightly different format. It was a wider form and it had the information across 2 columns. So if here it might have the first name here, the full legal name here, and the date of birth over here, for example. So every time it will come up with something slightly different. And if I wanted it to come up with that different format now, I could ask it to do so. What I'm going to do instead is I might ask it to change some other information in here. So perhaps where it's got social security number, I might want to just change that tag, change social security number label to just identification number. We'll spell that correctly. And I'll put please before it because you never know if one day the robots are going to take over the world. And if they do, I'd like them to look at me and say, oh, Greg was really polite to us. They might look upon me more kindly than others. So you can see there that we've now changed the social security number to identification number. So you can make whatever modifications you want to these forms. And I could now take the code that's here. Let's say, how do I use this form in a website? And it's going to tell me. So this is where I drill down and it's giving me a few different ways of doing it. So one option is I could copy the HTML code and save it as a .html file and then upload that to my web server and like pass it on to my software developers and so on. I could embed it in a different existing website. So there's different ways of using this form and embedding it. And you could very easily change the colors and fonts and so on to make it look the way that you want to. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to say that 4 applicants have completed a lease application form similar but slightly different to the form you designed. Please create a table which consolidates their responses. So prior to this session, I have created an existing form using exactly the same method as this, and I have filled the form in, and I've asked Claude to come up with some hypothetical names of 4 people and characteristics, and I've filled the form in, and I have 4 forms in a Word document, and I'm now uploading those 4 forms in a Word document into Claude, and I'm asking Claude to consolidate that information and to provide us with a summary of what's there, so that I don't have to sit there sifting through the 4 forms and comparing them. But Claude is just going to take all that information for me, put it all into one nice table, and we'll see whether it does some analysis for us or whether it just gives us the basic facts. You'll see I haven't really given it any instructions, so we'll see how clever Claude is in that respect. It'll just take a minute to come up with that table. Here it is. So that didn't take very long as well. So what we have here is, I'll just make this a bit wider like this. So we have our names, Jonathan Smith, Maria Gonzalez, Aidan Murphy, Sophia Chen. It would have been nicer if they had put the names in the columns rather than in the rows, because we have to scroll quite a long way across here. Still, it's done a pretty good job. We've got all their dates of birth, their ID numbers, their driver's licenses, and so on, their addresses. These are all American because Claude is an American company, and so they just by default assumed that I was from America. And this is where the context comes in. Had I have said I'm from the UK, then it would have put London addresses or Manchester addresses and so on. It's telling us the current rent that they're paying, employers, monthly income. And here we have whether they've committed any felonies in the past. So one of them has. Whether they've been evicted in the past, one of them has, and so on. Okay. So here we see there's 4 applications, what their average income is, average rent, and 2 of them have red flags. So what we're going to say is, please provide a recommendation. Okay. So what they're saying is we approve Jonathan Smith. He's the strongest candidate. He gets 5 stars, and it tells us why. It says approve Aidan Murphy. He's a strong second choice. Conditionally approve Sophia Chen. Proceed with caution. And that's based on the felony conviction. So you might want to find out more information, perhaps a police check, and get some more details about that. And we're going to decline Maria Gonzalez because she's got a previous eviction history. So there you go. I've got all this data. Within about a minute, I have a recommendation on who to approve rather than having to sift through all the data. So the next thing I want to do is I want to write to the candidates. I want to adopt your recommendation. Please draft a tailored email to each. So I'm not having to sit here giving detailed instructions. I'm just giving a couple of sentences, and we've now got the emails that go to each of these 4 people. And if there was only one apartment available, I would say there's only one apartment available, and the letter to the number 2 candidate would look a bit different. And so this all comes back to the the information that you provide, the context, the instructions, and so on. And here we've got some notes on each person. And so Jonathan Smith, it has an enthusiastic, congratulatory tone. Aidan Murphy has a warm, professional tone. Sophia Chen has a respectful and encouraging tone. And Maria has a professional and respectful tone. So even the tones of each one is different. And I could read through all of the content and you'll see that the content will be different as well. So this one says approved in big bold letters with an exclamation mark. It talks about next steps, what they need to do next. This is exactly what you might want to include in a letter. So you could either use this as a starting point, or you could just fill in the gaps here, hit the print button, and you're on your way. Now, I mentioned I'm going to talk about automation a little bit later because I do believe that with the right AI tools, you could completely automate this entire process of from the time somebody makes an inquiry about a vacant apartment all the way through to assessing their applications and finally sending them lease documents. But we'll come back to that. What we're going to do now is we're going to create a tenant handbook, and then we're going to move into a chatbot. So we'll start a new chat. So here's our context. There's a new hypothetical BTR site opening soon called the Vista. It's based in London. It's going to have 200 apartments, which all have 1 or 2 bedrooms. I'm the community manager. I'm asking to create a tenant handbook that tenants can refer to. We're going to have some foreign students. We want to be considerate of their cultural issues. Now, before asking to create the handbook, I'm asking here a really important question. What else would you like to know? Because if you were briefing an employee to write this handbook, then you would give them an opportunity to say, what questions do you have? And they would ask you a whole lot of questions. And we do the same thing with AI as well, because if you don't give it this opportunity, the AI tool is just going to make some assumptions, which may or may not be right. So I'm asking it, what else would you like to know? I think this is one of the most important questions that you can ask in prompting Gen AI tools. So it's now thinking, and so it's asking, what amenities will the Vista offer? Are utilities included in the rent, or do tenants arrange their own? What's the parking situation? Will there be on-site staff? Policies and procedures, practical information, student-focused considerations, emergency and safety, and so on. So it's asking some really, really good questions. It's very clever that it's thinking of these questions. And what I'm going to do, I don't have time here to answer all the questions. So I'm going to say, please develop hypothetical answers for all these questions. Don't leave any gaps, for example, XXX or TBC in the document, because I want a fully comprehensive document for the next part of this webinar. So we'll put in that response. And so now it's going to start writing this handbook. And it's got all the sections in it that you would expect to see, which is great. So while it's doing that, what I might do is move on to the next topic, because it might take a couple of minutes for this handbook to finish writing. So what we're going to do now is we're going to use a tool within Claude that's called deep research. And deep research is something you would use. Oh, that wasn't supposed to happen. Deep research is something that you would use when you want to research something extensively. Okay, so here is my prompt. I'll use Claude for this one. New chat. I'm the operations manager of Campus BTR site in Manchester, which is a new BTR site in Manchester. Which other operational sites within 2 miles have more than 300 apartments? Now I'm going to click on this button here called research, and it's just turned blue. And Claude is going to do a much, much more extensive researching job than it would normally do for this particular task. And it's going to take 5 to 10 minutes to do because it's going to scour the internet for literally hundreds of different documents. So this is what you do when you want to do some really, really extensive research. Just while we're doing this, I'll show you a couple of other tools. So there's use style, so you can nominate the writing style, and you can also use this tool here, extended thinking, where Claude will tell you what it's thinking as it goes through the process. It slows the process down. I'm not going to do it, but you can see it talking out loud about what it's doing and why it's doing it. So we're going to use deep research to do this. ChatGPT has similar functionality as well, just out of interest, and you can use that through Poe too. So while this research is going on in the background, you can see here we're getting a little bit of update on what's happening. So we're now creating a research plan. We've been going for 8 seconds so far, and we'll come back to that soon. So here we are. We're now back to our tenant handbook, and we've got the full handbook here. I'm not going to read it bit by bit, but what I do want to do is query the handbook, and I want to not to query it in this chat, but I want to download it, and then I'm going to re-upload it into a new chat, and I'm going to ask a couple of questions, because I think this is a really valuable way of using Claude or ChatGPT. Is if you've got an incredibly long document and you don't want to sit there reading the whole thing, that you just have a couple of questions. You can upload the document, and then you can ask the AI tool the questions you have, and then you don't have to read through the whole thing. So I can go copy, or I can go save as PDF. I could copy it into Word. Let's say I decide to save as a PDF. That's how I would go about it. I think I've already saved a similar handbook to this already. So let me try and use that. Upload a file. Here we go, the Vista Tenant Handbook. So I've made a similar handbook already, which I'm just going to upload now just to save time. And I'm going to ask you, here is a tenant handbook. What is the phone number of Vista? Okay. So there you go. It's telling me all the different phone numbers, the concierge desk, the emergency maintenance, security, the community manager, and so on. So I now have all of this information from the handbook, and I didn't have to read through the entire handbook to get all of that information. What I'm going to do next is we're going to create a chatbot using this very same document. So we'll use the handbook to train our chatbot. So I clicked here, which is artifacts, and we're going to create a new artifact, start from scratch, and here's my prompt. There's our deep research, still going. It's been going for 3 minutes and it's now got to 240 sources. It's still going. Okay, so please help me create a chatbot. I'm going to upload this same document again, the Vista Tenant Handbook. And so we're going to ask them to create a chatbot. Now this chatbot is going to be exactly the same thing that we just had, but it's portable and it's something that you could take and then move to a different website and share it with all of your residents, for example, or you could have a chatbot for your call center staff, where if someone asks them a question and they don't know the answer, they quickly type it into the chatbot. Or you could put this chatbot, you could publish it on your website. So there's lots of different ways that it could be used. Now they're suggesting a direction here. So they're going to put in these features, capabilities, the technical approach. This is how that React, that's essentially programming approach. And once you confirm this direction, I'll start building the interactive chatbot. So now you should review all of this and check it meets your requirements, but I'm going to put yes, please go ahead. And it's now going to start creating this chatbot. So you can see once again, we've got all the code here that's being created. Let's see what's happening with our deep research. Here we go. So we've identified 2 operational developments with 300 plus apartments. One is called Deansgate Square that has 1,508 units, and another one is called Angel Gardens, 466. And we have a report here that includes the location details, the distance from campus, the amenity information, and so on, plus a brief market context on Manchester's BTR sector with over 11,400 operational units. Now, I don't live in Manchester. I don't even live in the UK. So some of you might know better than I do how accurate this information is, but I would imagine that it's pretty accurate, okay? And we have a reasonably short summary here, okay? And what I want to do now is I want to take this short summary and I want to prepare. I'm actually going to try dictating this time because I find sometimes I can speak faster than I can type. So let's try this. Please compare, let's start again. Please prepare a detailed competitor analysis on the Deansgate Square and Angel Gardens build-to-rent sites. Okay, I'm going to press the research button again and click go. And so now it's asking me a few questions. Should I focus on specific operational metrics like these, or do you want a broader competitive analysis? So we'll put in 1, broad, 2, is it for a particular business decision? We'll say general. And 3, what time frame should I focus on? We'll say current. Okay, you can put in whatever you like. We've got the blue research button on again. And so uh, now it's going to start writing our competitor analysis, and it's already done the research, so it's already captured a whole lot of information, and so it's starting to tell us lots of information now about these two competitors. So this is something that you can all do in your own businesses. You can easily research your competitors and grab hundreds of different websites and articles that have been written about your competitors. It'll be from their own website, but lots of different articles and perhaps feedback on review sites and so on to learn as much as possible about them. And so there's the information, there's the analysis. And if there's anything you wanted to dig into further, then you can do that too. I'm not going to do that just in the interest of time. So deep research is a tool that you can use to give you really, really detailed information from a research perspective. And here we researched 240 different sources. I dare say it would be impossible for a human to do this, to go to 240 sources. You just couldn't do it in a reasonable time frame, let alone having to read through the 240 and then consolidate all of the information. So I find that's a really valuable activity there. Okay, now let's go back to our chatbot. So here we have the chatbot that we built, and it's called the Vista Assistant. I didn't give it that name, it came up with that name, and it says, "Hello, I'm your Vista tenant assistant. I'm here to help you with questions about the Vista, from amenities and policies to local recommendations. How can I assist you today? Ask me anything about the Vista." So let's just ask what amenities are in place. You'll remember we've trained this chatbot on the tenant guide that we put together. And here we go. So not only is it telling me what amenities there are, it's giving me information about them. So we've got the fitness center, the study hub, the social lounge, the rooftop terrace, the laundry facilities, and it's telling us where they are in the building, key card access, a little bit about them, and 24/7 or what hours they're open. So it's giving us some additional information about each of those. And so I've just created a chatbot in a few minutes, and that's something that you could really easily do as well. And once again, you can take this chatbot and you can copy it and load it up onto a website or integrate it with other apps and so on. All of the code for doing so is all sitting there behind the scenes. Okay, I'm going to pause for a minute. I'm just going to check if we have any questions. Here we go. We do. Uh, so, okay, we've got a question. Are pets allowed? So let's ask that. So no doubt a pet lover. Here we don't see any information about pets or policies in the tenant handbook provided. For question about whether they're allowed, I'd recommend contacting the concierge. So not only is it just saying there's no information, it's telling us what to do next, and it's being really helpful. You can speak to the concierge on this phone number. You can speak to the community manager. Her name's Sarah Williams. Here's how you get in touch with her. Here are the hours that she works. So it's really, really helpful in that respect. And what we could do now, given that uh, given that question hasn't been answered, we could use that to go back and update the tenant guide to provide more information about whether pets are allowed in the building or not. So you could, after a few months, you could look at all the different queries that came into the chatbot, consolidate them and say, what are the most common types of queries? Which ones could we answer? Which ones couldn't we answer? And that will inform how you update the guide going forward. Okay. Just check there's no more questions. I think that was the same one. Okay, great. So there's no more questions at this point. Let's move on. I want to talk now about which use cases provide the strongest financial benefits. So we'll open up a new chat. You're an operations manager. Sometimes I'll type I'm an operations manager. Sometimes I'll type you're an operations manager. It doesn't make a difference. For a build to rent, in order of preference, which 5 AI use cases would create the largest financial benefits? So previously we just asked for 10 use cases for someone that had never used these tools before, but now we're digging in and being more specific and saying we want a financial benefit, perhaps because our boss has some KPIs, or we've got some KPIs around financial benefits. So we want to use the tools in a way that's going to help us improve the financial performance of our business. Ultimately, that's what many of us are here for. So we've got predictive maintenance and asset management, dynamic pricing and revenue optimization, tenant screening and risk assessment, energy management, and automated property management and tenant services. So I'm pleased to see all of those there. I'm particularly pleased, although it doesn't surprise me, to see that in the top 5 is number 2, dynamic pricing and revenue optimization. And that's essentially what we do here at Price Wizard, is we help operators optimize what rent to charge. And I know from experience that the return on investment you get from focusing more on this is very, very high. And anybody who's not focusing on this is really, really leaving money on the table. Now, if you're interested in learning a little bit more about dynamic pricing and revenue optimization, then what I would suggest that you do is join this webinar, which is taking place on the 12th of September. And this is being run by Urban Living News. So register for this webinar on the 12th of September, and in that webinar, we'll be talking about that very topic, dynamic pricing, and we'll have a panel there. So I'm looking forward to that one. And I'll pop the URL of that into the chat in a few minutes. And then another activity I would encourage you to participate in is this new tool this is hot off the press, just released yesterday. And we've built this at Price Wizard because a lot of BTR managers believe that they're good at pricing, at setting rents. And in my experience, they could be still improving on the way that they do things. And so we've created this self-assessment tool so that you can really see whether you are doing pricing as well as you think you are. So I'd encourage all of you to have a look at that as well. I'll be popping those two into the chat a little bit later, and I'll be sending out an email with those links as well in a few days' time, so you can check them out. Okay, now I want to talk about voices and branding. So we'll hop back into Claude. For these BTR operators in the UK, mode of living, way of life, ILA and L and Q, I want you to create a table which describes the marketing voice and writing style of each operator. And the reason this is important is because we all write in a particular way, and as businesses, we all have brands that um, determine the way that we like to present ourselves. And the AI tools, if they're briefed properly, if they're prompted properly, they will identify how we write and try and copy that style. And so here, what they're doing is they're looking at 10 different documents for each of those four operators and trying to understand the style and the marketing voice. And so we've got a bit of a summary of what those four look like. And so if we look at the table, and I'll just run down the marketing voice. So we've got aspirational lifestyle here. We've got professional hospitality inspired with tech focus. This one's heritage inspired, and this one's social purpose. So they're all very, very different, and that's why I chose some of those. And here for writing, so we've got confident and bold, we've got clean and efficient, we've got thoughtful and culturally aware, and we've got formal, mission focused. So all very, very different styles. Now, it's one thing to know what your style is. It's another thing to write in that style. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to say for a hypothetical new BTR site in Canary Wharf called The Connect, write a 200-word advertisement for each operator using their own marketing voice and writing style. So I'm expecting to see four very different advertisements here. Now, while that's happening, I'm just quickly going to copy those URLs into the chat, which is actually difficult for me to do because when I try to do so, the Zoom screen comes up. So I'll come back to that a little bit later. Here we go. There's one. There's the first one. So that's the webinar. I'll do the other one in a few minutes. So, Motor Living, welcome to the Connect, where Canary Wharf meets Life 2.0. The next one, Way of Life, introducing the Connect, elevated living in the heart of Canary Wharf. And then we have Welcome to the Net, where Canary Wharf's towering ambitions meet London's maritime soul. And finally, Quality Homes with Purpose at London's business heart. So you can see there four very different approaches to marketing. Now, just for something, just to demonstrate how this can work, we're going to do two more, and we're going to make one of them humorous and one of them Shakespearean. And this is just to demonstrate how these styles can work. And so here in the humorous, I'll just, so the Shakespearean, hark, the Connect doth rise in fair Canary Wharf. What noble dwelling graces Thames' fair banks. And here with the humorous, we have tired of living with Kevin, who thinks washing up fairy is a real person. And so on. The 24-hour concierge won't judge you for ordering takeaway at 2 a.m. So you can have different marketing styles and approaches. Now, what we can do using Claude is we can train the AI model on our own marketing and voice and our own writing style based on documents we've written in the past. And we do that using this button here, which is called Projects. So I have trained Claude on my own writing style that I use at PriceWizard. And I've done that by uploading these 5 documents, which are a collection of ebooks and blog posts and internal documents and our website. And by doing that, it is now trained on the way that we write as a business and the way that I write. And I ran a query earlier today. I asked her to analyze my own personal writing style, which would be very different to the way that any of you on this webinar write. So it says that I write with a conversational, confident, and slightly contrarian voice, story-driven approach. I use rhetorical questions, direct address, numbered lists, and clear frameworks. It doesn't surprise me to hear that. A lot of people tell me that I talk in bullet points sometimes, and vivid analogies and metaphors, and I'm a data storyteller. Uh, we use a lot of data at Price Wizard, so it's not surprising that I'm a data storyteller. So that's my writing style, and you can use this to train the models on whatever your writing style is so that it sounds authentic for you. Okay, next use case. What we're going to look at now is coaching. So I would imagine this is a use case that you have not used in the past. What I have done is I have written a transcript of a meeting of 3 people in a build to rent team meeting. And when I say I've written it, I've actually got Claude to write it for me. I instructed Claude on how I wanted the meeting to go. I could show you the transcript, but I don't think that's important. But what I want to do is provide feedback to the 3 team members. Okay, so let's upload this file, team meeting, and you can record team meetings. There's lots of apps to do that, and then you can feed the recording in here, and you can do exactly the same thing with your team. What's really interesting about it is often employees will trust the feedback from these AI models more than they'll trust the feedback from their boss or from their work colleagues, because it's supposedly independent or impartial. So the feedback for Jane, who's the team manager, is that she should take more decisive leadership. She should facilitate productive discussion and so on. Her strengths: she attempted to redirect towards solutions rather than blame and recognized the need for a follow-up. And we've got some recommendations. Paul, he's the finance guy. He was aggressive and accusatory, and he shut down productive dialogue. He should be acknowledging systemic issues. He was right about the numbers, but he dismissed Sally's resource constraints that he himself had created through cost cutting. And he should be problem solving collaboratively rather than blaming. And then we can look at the same thing for Sally. She's the property manager as well, and she should be more proactive. She should focus on solutions rather than explaining the problems, and she should be more composed professionally. And when you look at that feedback, we probably all know people that fall into one or more of those categories to some extent. Uh, but this is a really good way of pointing that out to them in a non-threatening manner. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to do some data analysis. So we'll start a new chat. I'm the operator of a BTR site. Attached is a summary of the current leased apartments in the building. Please prepare a chart which shows the timing of when leases expire. So we'll add this file, lease data. Now, while that's happening, I'm going to go and look at exactly the same data which I've uploaded into Google Sheets. And you could do this in Excel as well. So I've put exactly the same file into Google Sheets. We've got unit numbers, what level of the building it's on, how many bedrooms, the area, the current rent, and the lease expiry date. And I'm going to put the identical prompt in here. I just want to show you that there's many ways to skin a cat here. And you could do this exact same task using Google Sheets, or you could use Claude or ChatGPT, Excel, and so on. They've all now got these AI tools in them. Let's come back to Claude. So Claude looks like it's still analyzing the data and writing the JavaScript code. JavaScript is like a programming language, essentially. It looks like it's getting stuck here somewhere, but let's see how it goes. Now here, Google has already finished and we have our chart. As you can see there, hope you can see that chart. I'd like to make it a bit bigger, but I don't really know how to do that. Oh, here we go. So we have our chart. So you can see there's quite a lot of leases that are expiring in September, October, November. That's a bit problematic. One of the things that we like to do at Price Wizard is to ensure that you don't have this pattern. You'd much prefer to have your leases expiring more evenly throughout the year, and ideally at the time of the year when seasonal demand is strongest. So we would need to take some corrective action here to try and help you have these leases expire in a more even pattern. Let's go back to Claude and see if Claude has managed to complete this chart. Here we go. So we've got exactly the same looking chart, and Claude is smart enough to know that there's this high risk period. So I didn't need to tell Claude about high risk periods. It already knew that we have 60% of our portfolio expiring in just 3 months. And that's a bit of a problem. So and here we've got the same information in a monthly breakdown and what the average rent is for the leases expiring in each month. So there's lots of analysis that you can do here and information that you can extract from this data. And all I uploaded was the table that you can see here, which is just a simple Excel or CSV table. Now, for those of you that are into statistics, I know that statistics was my favorite, or one of my favorite subjects at university, and I'm sure all of you would also say that statistics was your favorite subject at university. And so for those of you that are in that camp, we're going to ask to prepare a scatter plot. If you can remember what a scatter plot looks like. I could do this in Claude as well. Just spreading the love around a little bit. And so what we have here is a plot that compares current rent on the y-axis and area on the x-axis. So as you'd expect, where the area is bigger, the rent is higher in terms of, this is dollars, but it could be pounds. And there are some cases where if you drew a line of best fit, the dots are above the line. So you might say, well, maybe we're overcharging a little bit for those versus others. Or maybe there's a good reason that the dot is above the line, because maybe perhaps that apartment is south facing versus north facing. Maybe it's on a higher level. Maybe it's got a balcony, or it's got parking, or some other attribute. And that's another area of pricing that we make sure we get right at Price Wizard, that every attribute is priced correctly. Now, in this case, it hasn't given us what the formula is for a line of best fit, but we could ask for that if we wanted to. We'll see if Claude has done that. Um, it hasn't, but it's given us here some recommendations. We perhaps could do some early bird renewals, target July, August expiring tenants for longer term renewals. And this is a strategy that we like to use at Price Wizard as well. So what we're going to do now, I'm going to check for questions. No, we don't have any more questions. I do have some more prompts, but rather than going through additional prompts, I'm going to jump back into the presentation because there's a couple of other slides that I want to share with you. And I think these are perhaps the most important slides of the entire presentation. So sit tight while I do that. In the meantime, feel free to ask any more questions. Okay, I want to talk about this concept of agents and what is an agent. If you haven't heard of agents already, I might just go back to the previous slide so we don't jump ahead. If you haven't heard about agents, then this is coming to a store near you, and agents is where these generative AI tools are heading very quickly. And if you haven't heard of them, you'll become familiar with them quite soon. And what an agent essentially does is it takes a process that uses AI in part of the process, and it automates it and brings together a whole range of different steps in that process. So this is an example. Suppose we have a process for potential tenants who have contacted you and they want to do a tour of your building. And the process might start with an email inquiry, which could come directly from an email. It could come from them clicking on an advertisement on a real estate portal, for example, and it comes into your email inbox. What you would ideally want is that the AI tool sees the email, understands that this is an email where somebody wants to do a tour or they want to inquire about moving to this particular BTR site. And if you've got multiple sites, it works out which site they're referring to. And then it triages between the different sites and works out the next step. And that step could be, for example, sending back an email with a booking link for different tours, maybe with Calendly, where they can choose the times and dates of a tour they want to go to. And you might then, together with that email and booking link, you might invite some more questions by return email. And when the questions come in, you might use your chatbot functionality to answer those questions automatically without any human involved whatsoever. Now, you may look at this and say, oh, I feel uncomfortable about this process. I don't like automating our process away. There's risk. What if something goes wrong? And so on. And these are the risks in business that you have to take or decide what your risk tolerance is. But the tools there are there now to automate this entire process using what are called agents. So that's a process for a pre-tour. And then we might have post-tour. So after a tour, you might send out a thank you email, ask people to confirm what date or they want to move in, and perhaps which apartment they want to move into. And then you might populate an application form for them with all of the information that you can populate, including the date and the apartment number and the amount of rent and so on, and send that application form to them automatically. So once again, they would come back to you by email with the date, and your system would identify what that email is and respond. Once again, no human interaction whatsoever. And then finally, what happens once the application form comes back in? And so your tool would identify this is an application form. We're going to save the details in our CRM system if it's not there already. We'll assess the applicants like I did earlier. We'll notify them of the outcomes. We can send them lease documents. Maybe in the middle here, you're doing reference checking as well. We can follow up the lease documents. We can populate our property management system and send a welcome pack. So those processes could all be automated from start to finish using what are called AI agents. And if this is something that you choose to do in your business, it's going to free up a lot of your capacity to work in other areas and provide better service to your tenants and prospective tenants. Now, I'm just going to pause there and see if you've got any questions on agents. Not at the moment. I know that sounds a little bit overwhelming and perhaps confronting, but this is where the world is going to head. And it doesn't need to be with customer-facing tasks either if you're not comfortable with that. It could just be receiving lease documents and reading that information and populating your property management system or populating your CRM and so on, where you're not sending something directly to a customer. It could be that the tool drafts an email and it needs a person to read the email and hit the send button before it actually goes. So you do have a human review in there, but you don't have somebody spending their time drafting the email themselves and working out which email template to send and accidentally writing Dear Jane when it was Michael's application that came in because you've copied from one template to another and so on. So I think over time, you may not see the value now, but I think you're all going to get a lot of value from these agents. And finally, I want to just share a few thoughts with you. So 6 final thoughts. For any activity you're doing at work, I would encourage you to say, how can I use AI for this activity? Because the more you start thinking in this way, the more use cases you'll come across and the better you'll get at prompting the AI and working out how to use it. If the AI isn't working for you, you have to ask, is the problem the AI or is the problem the prompt? And I would say in more cases than not, the issue is going to be with the prompt. And if you write a better prompt, you'll get a better outcome. Just like with your staff, if you give them better instructions, you'll get a better outcome. If you don't know where to start, then ask AI where to start. And if you don't know how to continue and what to do next, ask AI what to do next. Just keep practicing. Like with everything in life, the more you practice, the better you're going to get at it. And finally, recognize that AI isn't perfect, but nor are people. And so we shouldn't expect AI to be perfect, and it doesn't need to be perfect in order to give us a better outcome or as good an outcome as what we can get out of our team members. So that's the way that I think about AI. We use AI as much as possible within those constraints that I mentioned around data privacy and hallucination. And we're constantly looking for more and more ways that we can use it ultimately to give a better outcome for our clients. For us, it's not about saving costs, it's about being able to scale faster and help more clients with the resources that we have. So I'm going to pause there. Okay, we have a comment in the chat box. Thank you for the session. That is my absolute pleasure. I did say that I've got some more I've got some more links to put in. So let me give you this link here. We'll put that in the chat box. That's for the self-assessment. I'd encourage you all to do that. We don't collect your names or contact information when you do that, so it's entirely anonymous at this point in time. We may do that in the future, but for the moment, we're not collecting any contact information. So it's an anonymous exercise. And let's see if we have any more questions or chats. Not at the moment. So we are out of time. Once again, I'd encourage you to attend the dynamic pricing webinar that I shared with you a few minutes ago. I'll bring that up again. There we go. Urban Living News, dynamic pricing in build to rent on the 12th of September. I'd encourage everybody to attend that one. And I'll stay on the line for a few more minutes if you've got any questions, or feel free to reach out to me. I did put my email address up a few minutes ago. It's greg@pricewizard.io. Feel free to reach out to me if you've got a private question at any time. And if you are looking to get a higher return from better pricing, then we're here to help at Price Wizard as well. I'll stay on for a couple more minutes. Thanks everybody for attending. Here we go. We've got another chat. Thanks, Greg. Great webinar. Thank you very much for that.